So yeah, we're both very happy to be here tonight. And I also want to thank and acknowledge the other people involved in this project, from my partner Alex Washburn to my colleague Tatiana Cholika, the client, of course, EDC, and the many consultants and many others who were involved in this project since 2001 when it started. Waterfronts are very long-term projects and takes a big team effort, so I wanted to get that out there. So this project, I guess I have to, there we go. I should have done that already. Thresholds, we'll try to remember to say that word. Here we have it. This is the site. And this project actually was in two parts. There was a master plan as well as the first phase implementation. The master plan outline, you see we're in Upper Manhattan, roughly between 123rd and 135th Streets from Broadway to the Hudson. And then you see the site itself for the park, which is that very thin sliver of red on the water, which is the actual place of many thresholds. It's a threshold between land and water, nature and the city, old and new, past and present, closed and open, and I'm sure many others. Except the site, when we arrived there, really revealed none of this. So our task was to reimagine this interface in conjunction with the community and the client in a way that would reveal some of the dynamic forces at work here and transform the place into one where human interaction is seen as a dynamic part of the overall ecological system. So the forces here that we wanted to explore begins with water and land. Over time, the water has eroded the softer material between the two big bluffs on either side of our site, and we have beautiful cove. This is what the site used to look like, and these topographic features still exist, although you wouldn't know it with all the things happening at the present time. The historic map shows the topography in plan and the way that this path, which has now become 125th Street at angle to the grid, intersects with the water. The natural interface soon became, so here it is, almost in that state. And then it started to become a much thinner edge over time. The Riverside Drive was added with this large viaduct, which made a line further dividing the city from the water. More viaducts, the piers were added, first projecting out into the water, and then when the rise of automobiles happened, we got the Henry Hudson Parkway and then Amtrak for a total of 3 viaducts cutting you off from the water and a lot of parking and other auto-related uses. Finally today, or at least when we started the project, most of this had gone away, the industries were gone, and we were left with the parking lot on the edge, a single line dividing land and water, and the community very much wanting to reclaim this space. And they've been working on it a much longer time than we have, almost 30 years. What they most wanted was to get that sense of interaction back with the water, you know, that sense of time and place that's so magical when you go to a place like this and you're able to use it flexibly at different times. The interface also needed to connect 125th Street with the water. It's their gateway to the water. They wanted to connect the parks on the north and south side, which are to the left and the right in this picture. And they also wanted to connect the bike trail and basically, you know, to be able to enjoy the water. So we began the process of how to, that narrow site, if you go back to that first slide, how could we expand the land to try to give them more of an interface with the water? And historically, these are what the piers look like there. None of them existed, as you saw when we began. But so we tried to think of a way to move out into the water, and we thought back to the cove and the kind of deposition that happened in a place like that, and came up with the idea of, I'm going to move this over, so there. came up with the idea of making the pier be formed like a sandbar and sort of pivoting out from the land, expanding the land in that direction, and then letting 125th Street intersect that, breaking it into actually two piers, one conveniently for fishing and one for boating, and see how that would work then with the upland. So at the upland, we wanted to create a certain density that comes from the deposition over time, trying out different ways of thinking about it. Also, we wanted a cove where the land sloped down towards the water, and then we wanted the land to slope up to get a different type of prospect. And we started working with these elements floating around the site, and finally ended up with the pivot, the high point, making a pivot point that was something that the pier could rest against and sort of land on. This is in process, obviously. Clay models, we did drawings. The other things we were concerned with, how would the streets, besides 125th Street at the angle, how would the grid streets start intersecting with the different parts of the park and the material that sort of floats in that accumulation process. So here you see the pivot taking form on the center line of the one street, that line of the pier against it, and some deposits that isn't very ordered yet. So we worked some more. Here's the client and reviewing one of our final models in the office. And this is the plan. And I'm just going to walk you through it quickly, and then we'll go to the photographs. So again, we have the pier, which is resting on woodland, or not quite, just sort of teetering on the woodland pivot. Then the cove, bisected by 125th Street, and the different pieces of benches and sloped lawns and other things that sort of washed in, as we like to think of it. So the whole idea was to bring together the land and the water to make a form that would expand this interface. So I'm not going to walk you around different parts. We're going to start at the pier and where it hits the woodland. So here it is actually in 3 dimensions. You can start to see how it spreads out from the base of the hill. It's actually a very 3-dimensional place. And now we're going to go in and look right down the pier. So here we are approaching the pier. It's not quite finished. I do have to apologize. We thought it would be done. You have to imagine grass and the brown areas and a few other details finished, but you'll just all have to come and see it. It should be done in about a month. So there's the pier. As you get a little closer, you can see this is the stairs of the woodland pivot on the left, and you can see how the space, these diagonals start to expand, that very linear path that we had. We wanted to get away from the linear feeling and really expand the space. Here's looking back from where we came from. Again, the pivot, and we're not quite touching it. That was very purposeful. We wanted to feel like it was floating away. Now I'm on the pier looking back. And now I'm on the connector arm, which heads right out on the angle of 125th Street. It's a much narrower pier. Certainly one of the constraints we had to deal with in doing this is all the requirements of the various marine review agencies, which are multiple, and took a while to get these approved. These are new piers because the old piers were all gone. Okay, so now we're in the area of deposition, I would call it, the sort of pieces that have floated in and are really, there's a settling up against the pivot, but there's just a lot of where a lot of the pathways happen. There's the diagonal path against the pivot. There's a break in the path between the sloped lawns that is in line with one of the streets, and there's some planters. And then you see that line that we just left the piers on. Okay, so here, these are the sloped lawns, sort of coming up, making you feel like it's even more of a cove shape. These are actually constructed. They have concrete walls, which you'll see in a minute. That's a little hard to tell on this slide. Here they are. So this is that point where you go through them. And again, they hopefully look like they're not positioned by human hands. This would be the space between where there'll be, if you see very carefully those circles in the pavement, those will be jumping jewels for kids to play in, little water features. And then moving along to the Corten planters with the bike trail, which is now in gravel, it will become asphalt on the right. The path then, and then the Corten planters brings us back to the actual cove itself, where these concrete, which you'll hear more about soon from Johannes, we thought we were going to have pieces of the bulkhead to use originally. I guess he'll tell you this story. So anyway, they're sprinkled, deposited along the shore, again, like by the waves. And you see the sloped lawn again in the distance. And here's a more central view. And also in the distance, I want to point out something else when you come and when it's open to see. There's a shrouded figure there. There are 3 of those on the site. Those are sculptures by Neri Ward. He came and also did another kind of threshold about working with the community to bring their past memories back to the site, and I won't spoil what it's about. You'll have to come and see it for yourself. And then this is the cove looking back again towards the hill, and the little building anchors that's the utility shed, anchors the 125th Street axis. And so this is my time to turn it over to Johannes. He's going to tell you a little bit about the detailing and how we determine the materials and things like that.
Thank you. As you've seen, we've tried to really incorporate what we found on site, those conditions, in terms of concept, expanding threshold. And we also felt like this was a strong concept to take it all the way to the small details and the materials. By the way, just quickly, this is actually the same size view down here as the park above, so you can see how it spans and where it sits in the site. So we're on a river, and there's a lot of gravel there. And fortunately, we actually found original Hudson Valley River gravel, and we really wanted to bring that kind of beach feel to the site, but of course it's hard to do, so we decided to use that gravel in exposed aggregate concrete, and that's the main pavement along the entire site. And we used that gravel as well to fill in between bulkhead and our walkway, and also in between stones, and you can really see how this gravel kind of comes in and seeps through and then goes onto site to form the main pavement. Then other things that we thought would, come in position and on a beach is, well, shipwrecks. And even though this might be a little literal, we found that these objects, the Corten planters, really added to the dynamic of the space and helped to kind of form the perspective and add another layer to the sloped lawns and all these different lines that we had. So there are actually 2 of those flanking the sloped lawns, and at either end, unfortunately still not done, there's going to be big wood decks also just deposited there. They can hold up to 10 people, so you can sit on them and lounge on them. There's just another little detail where you can see the gravel again forming the edge along the Corten, and then this is the exposed aggregate with actually a lot of sandblast black stuff. And then we also took element that we actually found on site, same as on the beach. It's this interaction between what comes on and what is there. And you can really see all the layers of asphalt, cobblestones, concrete, and then further down below there's timbers that used to hold up this whole area. And we knew they were cobblestones, but we had no idea how many, and it turned out the entire site was covered in these Belgian block-style cobblestones, and they were very popular. They got all cleaned by hand, and they were gone within a week, I'd say. but we maintained some for the site to use for our main actually drainage feature, and it's always between the lawn and the pavement. Because the site is so flat, we had to play around a lot with grading and came up with this swale that actually stretches through the whole site. You can see it here. It starts out at the north end and then gets interrupted by the pier and then continues to move all the way back throughout the site. And then these are the granite blocks that Barbara mentioned that used to be on the bulkhead. And as we were thinking to lower the whole area to really build a cove, we wanted to reuse them and have them float in and have other stuff deposited on top, meaning benches of different configurations. Unfortunately, we didn't lower the cove, so we didn't have granite blocks. So we decided to actually use precast concrete blocks here that match nicely. And here's a view back to the cove, and you can see how these just float, and there will be benches on some of them, others will just be plain. And you can also see the swale again continuing here. And then unfortunately, where we built the piers, we had to take out some granite blocks, and those we used then in woodland to create the same concept of seating, but slightly different and playing again with old and new, and give all these areas their own character. And then one of the last elements that we took from the site was this very rusty and old fence / guardrail that we felt added, and we just updated it and gave it a little more designed look. And there's the top rail still missing here. It's the mock-up. This will stretch around the entire site. There's different types. And we know as an aerial view of the site, you can start to see how it's really integrating itself into the surroundings. There's this big band of green coming down, and once our little trees here will be bigger, you can see how this whole thing will just swoop under the overpass, and kind of, nature will finally come back to the site. And here's also, I think, a very good picture of this threshold condition where you can see all that's going on and how really the street we actually moved to get a bigger park, and it's making way for this new landscape. And then here, a little overview of all these elements, how they came floating in. And that will